Here's a ranking of the top 5 most important Sun Devils returning on offense for 2024.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Thanks as always for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. And a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. You can stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter. You can find me at RichieBrats36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. Today and tomorrow, we are going to be taking a look at the most important returning players for the Sun Devils football team in 2024. Today, we are going to be focusing on the offensive side of the football, and tomorrow will be the defensive side of the football. I have for you a top 5 as well as 5 honorable mentions that we're going to get into. However, there is one thing I need to disclose for you guys, and that is there are no quarterbacks on this list. I am not putting Jaden Rashada on here. I am not putting Trenton Bourguet on here. The reason why is because they play quarterback. What a concept. I am not going to include guys that are so obviously important to the team that it would be wasted breath to just talk about them over and over and over again. We all know who Jaden Rashada is. We all know who Trenton Bourguet is. It's not something that you guys want to hear over and over again. It's not something that I want to talk about over and over again. I want to talk about the guys that they are being surrounded by that are going to be important here. I want to talk about the guys who maybe are flying under the radar and, the average fan or the casual fan may not know who these guys are. And they deserve to have their roses and have their flowers. So we're going to talk about them today because we all know how important Rashada is. We all know how important Bourguet is. Obviously, they would be number 1 on this list, but that's not going to be the case. Now that that is out of the way, here are my 5 honorable mentions for you. The first one, this was kind of a tricky one here, but I put Jake Smith. And the reason why Jake Smith wasn't in my top 5 is because he didn't play last year because of the NCAA ruling over his transfer eligibility. If Jake Smith had played any bit of last year, I would have him higher. The reason why is we don't necessarily know what to expect. If it's based off his talent, then he's going to be your number 2 receiver, and he's going to be a very good number 2 receiver. However, if he's rusty or anything else, he's not going to be as high as some of the other guys. And I do have who I believe is going to come into this offseason as the number 2 receiver for this team. We'll talk about him momentarily, but Jake Smith's a beast. If everything works out, he's going to be much higher. I could see him as high as my number 2 most important player here. No worse than number 3. Next guy I have here for my honorable mentions is DeCarlos Brooks. He is also outside of the top 5 because he just barely played last year. He was banged up, and the inability to stay on the football field has him lower for me. But when he was on the field, him and Cameron Skattebo gave you thunder and more thunder. They were lining up Brooks at fullback and having both of them on the field at the same time. And my goodness, DeCarlos Brooks was just a beast when he was available. That's my little caveat with him. When he's healthy, he's one of the most important players here, which is why I still have him inside of my top 10, I suppose. Let's go ahead, move on past him. The next guy I have is Troy O'Mary. O'Mary is an absolute monster and was somebody who really outperformed any expectations he had last year. He was a beast on those 50-50 balls, and he should be as a 6'4 receiver. He was a post-up guy. He was a decent threat in the red zone. And when you have somebody who is able to do all those different things for you, he just brings another element here. I don't know how this receiver situation is going to shake out, because I do believe that you know who your number one is, and we'll talk about them later. You do know that Jake Smith is back. You know that Melquan Stovall is returning. You know that they are bringing in a lot of guys. Xavier Guillory is back. Jordan Tyson's back. We're going to talk about him in just a second. It's difficult to shake out these guys. O'Mary could be as high as the number 2 receiver. He could be as low as number 4 for me. Still, he brings an element to the game that's very important. Next up, Jordan Tyson, as I just mentioned. With him, similar to Jake Smith, you didn't really get to see him last year. He appeared in a couple of games, ran some routes, set some blocks, didn't record any statistics, but he was also recovering from a knee injury. Now that he is presumably healthy, this kid's a monster, and he can do it as a receiver. He can do it as a return man. He's got game-breaking speed and game-breaking ability to absolutely destroy opposing defenses. He's someone that I'm incredibly high on. I previewed him a lot last year under the assumption he was going to be healthy, and he just wasn't, and that's on me. But if he is 100% healthy, I mean, this is pound for pound, he might be your most talented player on offense. Last guy I want to mention, Bram Walden. If you listen to this podcast, you know how high I am on Bram Walden, so it might surprise you that he is last on my honorable mentions here. But the reason why is because the offensive line is going to have so many different players that are going to battle it out for positions here. Like Jalen Clem alone, adding him a handful of days ago from Washington, might be your starting left tackle. You have Josh Atkins who's coming in. Obviously, Bram Walden. There's Emmett Boley. There's no shortage. Max Ionacre. There are a ton of tackles here, and I don't know how it's going to shake out. And although for me, I would plug and play him as my starting offensive tackle, I can't guarantee that that's the same way that everybody else is going to see him. That being said, let's go ahead and hop into the top 5 here. Number 5 is Bryce Pierre. Bryce Pierre was your number 2 tight end last year. There was times where I believe he looked like the number 1 tight end on this team, and he looked like one of the more talented and consistent players that you had in the passing game. And a player who plays a complete game for me. I really believe in Bryce Pierre to be the new tight end 1 for this team. And they're going to need him because Jaden Fortier, the incoming 4-star freshman, is going through an ACL surgery that could keep him out for the first part of the year. So you're going to need Pierre to step up in an offense that caters to the tight end. If you are able to use the most of him and get the most out of him and have a consistent tight end weapon for this team, that's going to be huge for you. He's a beast. He's a stud. He's somebody that I really trust in the passing game. He's someone that I trust in the running game as a blocker. He is going to be a much more important piece than people realize. I view him as one of your top 5 pass catchers on this team. We all know who number 1 is. Probably Cameron Skattebo is number 2. You can shake out whoever you want as your number 2 receiver. And Bryce Pierre is going to be in that top 5 at worst. Would not be surprised if he was number 3 ahead of whoever your number 2 receiver might be. He's going to be a very imperative piece for you. And getting him to what am I trying to say? Getting him as involved in the offense as you can. That's going to be a boon for you. You're incorporating a very talented player. You're incorporating somebody who is going to be able to make a difference for you. That's why I have Bryce Pierre higher than some of the other guys I have. Like, yes, Jake Smith and Troy O'Mary and Jordan Tyson, all incredibly talented guys. But with Bryce Pierre as the number 1 tight end compared to those guys as the number 2 or 3 or 4 receivers, however it shakes out, I do have Pierre as a little bit more valuable here. If he takes that step forward, he's just going to be so good. I am very excited for the future of Bryce Pierre, and I implore you guys to also be very excited for him. But there's no shortage of weapons here. And how the reps and the targets are going to be distributed will be a very interesting storyline for the entirety of the season, and especially towards the beginning of the year as we start to get settled down with everything. But with that being said, I do have who I believe is the Sun Devils' number 2 receiver, slightly ahead of Bryce Pierre. We're going to talk about him in just one moment. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A happy Super Bowl to those who celebrate from FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is just a few days away, and it's going to be all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I'm looking forward to getting my favorite seat on the couch right in the middle with my buffalo chicken dip and taking a look at placing some wonderful prop bets for receptions and yards and all that good stuff. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who's going to win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for who's going to score a touchdown, how many points are going to be scored, and so much more. New customers join today. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, as always, and making the Locked On Sun Devils podcast your first listen of the day. Wherever you get your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. And, of course, a shout-out to my everydayers who are here every day. Let's get back into our conversation, and we're going to take a look at number 4 and number 3 next year for my most important returning players for the Sun Devils. Number 4, teased him a little bit and teed him up. Melquan Stovall is who I have as my number 2 receiver. And I know there's going to be a handful of people that maybe don't even realize who Melquan Stovall is. And you would be forgiven for that because he wasn't somebody that was overly involved in the offense last year because you had so many different guys that were vying for more playing time and overall just different roles. Melquan Stovall, however, is going to come into this offseason for me as the number 2 receiver. Last year, I had 18 catches, 207 yards. For what it's worth, he had 21 rushing yards, and his lone touchdown came on the ground. He had a little over 10 yards per punt return last year. He returned a handful of kicks. Like, they got him the ball in more ways than one, and this is the reason why I believe he's going to be heavily incorporated once again in the Sun Devils offense in 2024. And there's going to be a much more cut and dry situation for him because while you do have guys returning like Xavier Guillory, who I left outside of my top 10, and Troy O'Mary is coming back, you are going to be looking for a sure-handed number 2 receiver. And last year, outside of the number 1 guy, who everyone knows who it is, we'll talk about him later, outside of him, you are looking for consistency because Jalen Conyers is gone. And I know that's a tight end, but he was still one of your top options. Melquan Stovall has the veteran status to him as he's going into his 6th year of college. This is his 2nd year at Arizona State. He has sure hands, and he has the ability to do more things than one for you. That's where I have more value in Melquan Stovall than maybe others do. I truly do look at Stovall as somebody who's going to be imperative to this offense and somebody that is going to have a much bigger role than people realize. Now, is he going to be 40 catches and 500 yards and a handful of touchdowns? Who knows? What I do know is as we head into the season, there is, for me, like I said, to reiterate, a much more cut and dry role for him. You are going to be looking for somebody from last year to step up for you, because the Sun Devils really struggled with having a consistent number 2 receiver. I felt when Stovall was on the field that he had the capability to do that. And again, I mentioned Jake Smith earlier as probably potentially being your number 2 receiver, at least down the stretch. But until we get that far, Stovall feels like the number 2 for you. And at worst, he feels like the number 3. I wouldn't be surprised if your lineup included player number 1 and then some order of Stovall and Jake Smith. Stovall could also be a slot receiver for you. There's just many different ways to get him involved. That's the reason why I have him higher than some of the other guys. Number 3 for me, unless you're a diehard Sun Devil fan, you may not know who this is, and that's okay, because he may be the most important returning player on the offensive line, which is where I sit with it, and that is Leif Fautanu. And the reason why I have Fautanu higher than Bram Walden or Ben Coleman, who's returning from injury, the reason why I have him higher than those guys is because he was the one consistent player on the offensive line last year when it came to staying healthy. And sure, he was banged up, but he played in all the games. He is absolutely one of the more important players on this team. And obviously I have him in my top 3 because I truly believe that. With Leif Fautanu, you have consistency and you have more than quality play, maybe even closer to high level play. But he also plays center. And center is the second most important position along the offensive line. And I'll listen to an argument that it is the most important position outside of left tackle, because we all know how sexy it is to have the franchise left tackle and blah, blah, blah. But having a center who is going to be able to lead the other 4 guys and help the quarterback make the reads and understand the defenses and all that good stuff is where Fautanu is going to have an edge over some of those other guys. And he did play all of last year, the vast majority of last year. Yeah, he dealt with some stuff, but he played through it. He is so important to having him available. And if he is 100% again for the entirety of this season, you're going to see him as somebody who's going to be calling everything out. And Jaden Rashada, who redshirted last year for the team, is going to be, once again, very important for you to figure out what his role on the offensive line is going to be, right? Or let me back that up. He is going to be helping everybody else figure out their role on the offensive line. My apologies. That's what I meant to say. If he is good to go, I really do believe in him to be that level of importance to you. Really big fan of Leif Fautanu, as long as he is 100%. Now, I do have 2 more players in front of him who are very obvious who they are. And the reason why is because they're high-level play and what the other things that they're going to do for whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Rashada or Bourget or whatever. We're going to talk about him in just a second. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to buy your tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users are going to get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100. There's killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee is going to help you take the guesswork out of buying your tickets. You can see the seat from your viewpoint before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices are going to show you the total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 easy taps. Game Deal has tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find those killer last-minute seats with the exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You have the zone deals where you pick the section, Game Time picks a seat for an average of big time savings. And that Game Time guarantee means you're going to get the best price guaranteed. Guaranteed. You find tickets in the same section and row for less, and Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Again, right now, new customers are getting $100 off a big game ticket with Vegas or with the code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code Vegas100, VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. One more time, wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Wherever you're getting your podcast, like I said, turn on notifications. We're going to keep you up to date on everything Arizona State Sun Devils. And if you want to be up to date on everything else, then check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and you'll be up to date on every league, pro and college. Let's wrap up our conversation of the top returning players for the Sun Devils in 2024. Number 2, Cameron Skattebo, the people's running back, as I have dubbed him, because he runs it, he catches it, he throws it, he returns it, he punts it. He does it all, ladies and gentlemen. When you have a player who does everything for you, that is worth its weight in gold. But not only does he do everything for you, but he is able to do it at a high level. I mean, last year, he averaged almost 5 yards per carry on the ground. He was averaging almost 12 yards per reception last year. He had 9 rushing touchdowns. He had a huge 66-yard receiving touchdown. He was the best punter on the team last year in terms of net yards. Like, he did it all, man. He was so important to your team that if you took him off, I don't know if you have any wins. I really don't. Like, he was so imperative for all the success that you had. And he, once again, is going to be looking at that role in 2024 because he is going to be your number 1 running back, ahead of DeCarlos Brooks, ahead of Kyson Brown, ahead of Jason Brown, whoever else is going to line up back there, Raleek Brown. He is your number 1. But he's also going to be one of your top 5 receiving options at worst. I mentioned the number 1 guy. I mentioned Bryce Pierre, Melquan Stovall, whoever else, Jake Smith, Troy O'Mary, whatever. But having that reliable threat out of the backfield is where you're going to see the most difference here. And where you're going to see the most success is having somebody that you can consistently rely upon to catch the ball as a dump-off option or your check down, whatever it is. You have a Cameron Skattebo that's able to do those things for you. And he's a great runner too, man. Like, he's a hard-nosed runner. He's more agile than you think. He can make the cuts and make guys miss. He runs through the contact. He gets into the end zone. He does everything. He passes the ball. Like I said, he had a passing touchdown last year to Elijhah Badger against Washington in a game that the Sun Devils should have won. That is the kind of ability that you have here with a guy like Cameron Skattebo, is he does it all. You don't find many guys that can do everything that he can do for you. That's where you have such an advantage of having a player of his quality and his caliber. However, he is just outside of my number 1 spot because, ladies and gentlemen, the most important returning player for Arizona State Sun Devils football in 2024 is none other than Elijhah Badger. If you're on YouTube, you can see that he's been my number 1. If you are listening in a visual or a audio form, you already know who it was going to be. But to keep the suspense there a little bit, I did not mention him up until now. But Elijhah Badger, ladies and gentlemen, is certified number 1 receiver. And he's been your number 1 receiver the last 2 seasons. And he is perhaps the one guy who I will guarantee doesn't take a step back because he's done it for 2 years. And he's been with the program for, I think, 4 years. I think he's going into his 5th because I think he redshirted in 2020. At a minimum, this is his 4th year of playing time. He's that guy. He is going to end up putting up some all-time numbers for Arizona State. He has a very realistic chance to climb into that top 10 all-time. Just the last 2 years alone, he's got almost 1,600 receiving yards. There's a chance that he can get 1,000 this year, and that's going to propel him really, really high on the list. I don't have it in front of me, but that'll easily throw him in the top 10 for Arizona State. Last year, he had 4 total touchdowns, and for a Sun Devils team that didn't get in the end zone on offense, that was worth more than its weight in gold. Now you're talking about a receiver who is going to be the epitome of consistency for whoever the quarterback is, but we go in with the assumption it's Jaden Rashada. As long as he is there, you should have the confidence that you are going to have a player that can take the quarterback's play to the next level. Because while so much of it, right, you hear all the time, quarterbacks elevate their players. You want to see that at some point, but you also want to have a wide receiver that is able to help their quarterback play at a higher level, especially a young guy like Rashada, played 3 games last year. So with Elijhah Badger back in the folds, with Elijhah Badger as your number 1 receiver, with Elijhah Badger as one of the most consistent players the last 2 seasons, if not the most consistent player, that's where you are going to find the most consistency, success, whatever else. Elijhah Badger is that guy. As long as he is in the fold for the Sun Devils offense, I have faith in them to be able to take steps forward, leaps and bounds forward, because last year they weren't good. We can just call it as it is. If Badger stays doing what he's doing, and there's no reason to believe he can't continue to do what he's doing, you're in safe hands. For what it's worth, he does a little bit as a return man as well. He had a couple of really big returns last year. Didn't get into the end zone, but he did have an 81-yard return where he probably should have got in. He just got caught. But he does everything. Having a guy who does everything, like we mentioned for Cameron Skattebo, really opens up your offense and your ability to do more things than one. What a concept. He's your number 1. It's not close. I love Jake Smith. I love Melquan. I love Troy O'Mary. I love Jordan Tyson. I love a lot of the guys here. But Badger is the one who makes everything move. He's a stud. He's a beast. That's why he's my number 1 most important returning player. If you did not have Elijhah Badger coming out, my expectations would be significantly lower for the Sun Devils in 2024. But with him back, I do believe they're going to take a step forward this year. I believe in Elijhah Badger, ladies and gentlemen. That's why he's my number 1. That's how my top 5 shakes out. That's how my honorable mentions shake out. I'm curious who you guys think is the most important returning player for the Sun Devils in 2024 on the offensive side of the football. So leave a comment or hit me up on Twitter. You can find me at Richie Bradshaw36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils, wherever you're getting your podcast. Hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Thank you guys as always for tuning in. When we return tomorrow, we are going to be looking at the most important returning defensive players for Arizona State Sun Devils football. So make sure that you're tuned in. I'll see you guys then. Till then, you keep it locked right here on Locked